By 1962, Hollywood had quietly abandoned Marilyn Monroe. They labeled her unstable. They called her a problem. She was still the most recognizable woman on earth. Yet behind the spotlight she was completely alone. Everyone stepped away, everyone except Dean Martin. This is the lesser-known story of the one man in Hollywood willing to risk lawsuits, millions of dollars, and his own career to protect the dignity of a woman no one else was willing to stand beside. Imagine the moment. Summer 1962. The sun scorches the pavement of the 20th Century Fox lot, heat shimmering off the concrete. Inside the executive offices, however, the atmosphere is icy. A group of powerful men in tailored suits have just reached a cold conclusion. Marilyn Monroe, the woman who helped build their studio, whose image defined an era, has become disposable. Their plan is ruthless. Fire her, sue her, strip her of every dollar, replace her with someone younger, quieter, easier to control. They believed they held every advantage. They had the lawyers. They controlled the press. They had the money and the leverage. But they overlooked one critical detail. They forgot who was standing at Marilyn's side. They forgot that her co-star was Dean Martin. And Dean Martin did not operate by Hollywood's rules. In an industry built on betrayal, he was about to deliver a lesson in loyalty the studio would never forget. Everything came down to 4 words that froze a corporate empire in its tracks. No Marilyn, no picture. To grasp how powerful that moment was, you have to understand the chaos surrounding it. 1962 wasn't just a rough year for Marilyn Monroe, it was a nightmare for 20th Century Fox. The studio was hemorrhaging money and hovering on the edge of collapse. The reason had a single name: Cleopatra. Thousands of miles away in Rome, Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton were trapped in what would become the most expensive film production in history. The project was spiraling out of control. Massive sets were constructed, torn down, and rebuilt without ever being used. Elizabeth Taylor's health issues halted filming for weeks at a time. What began as a modest $2 million production ballooned to $44 million, an amount that would translate to hundreds of millions today. Fox was bleeding so badly they began selling off pieces of their own studio lot just to survive. Fear spread through the boardroom. Shareholders were nervous. Executives needed someone to blame, someone they could punish to prove they still had authority. But Elizabeth Taylor was untouchable. She was too powerful, and Cleopatra was already too far gone. So Fox shifted its focus to their other project. Something's got to give. The film was meant to be salvation, a light, fast-moving romantic comedy, a guaranteed hit. It paired two global icons, Marilyn Monroe and Dean Martin, in a proven formula designed to refill studio coffers. Instead, it became a pressure point, and Marilyn became the target. To the executives, Marilyn wasn't a person anymore. She was a risk on a spreadsheet. At 36, she was struggling deeply. Depression weighed on her. Anxiety consumed her. Prescription drugs had become a crutch. She feared aging. She feared forgetting lines. She feared the same camera that had once adored her and punished her in equal measure for over a decade. She needed understanding. She needed support. Fox offered none of that. Instead, they chose to make an example of her. If they couldn't control Elizabeth Taylor overseas, they would break Marilyn Monroe at home. That's when Dean Martin entered the picture. In 1962, Dean cast a long shadow over Hollywood. He had successfully escaped the Jared Lewis partnership, reinvented himself, and emerged as a dominant force on his own terms. His records topped the charts. His films filled theaters. He was untouchable, respected, and powerful in a way studios couldn't easily replace. And when Hollywood turned its back on Marilyn Monroe, Dean Martin didn't. He was part of the Rat Pack, close to a man who seemed to glide through life untouched by pressure. When Fox asked him to play opposite Marilyn, Dean agreed without hesitation, not because it was a smart business move, but because he understood her in a way most men never did. On the surface, they couldn't have been more different. Dean carried himself with effortless ease, while Marilyn lived in a constant state of anxiety. Dean treated show business like a job. Marilyn treated acting like a mission, desperate to be taken seriously. But beneath those differences, they were cut from the same cloth. Both were outsiders who had conquered an industry that never truly accepted them. Both survived by wearing masks. Dean hid behind the image of the carefree drunk, the man who didn't care. Marilyn hid behind the persona of the bubbly blonde, always smiling, always desirable. Dean saw past that illusion. He recognized the gentle, intelligent, deeply afraid woman beneath it. They had known each other for years, crossing paths at parties and events. Dean made her laugh, and in a world full of men who wanted something from her, a man who simply wanted to make her laugh meant everything. When Dean signed on to something Essie got to give, he insisted on one specific clause, a standard demand for stars of his stature, but one that would soon become a weapon. Costa. Approval. He wasn't agreeing to work with just anyone. He was agreeing to work with Marilyn. He believed he could shield her. He believed his calm presence would steady her nerves. He told friends it would be easy. A few jokes, a few songs. Get her through it. He was wrong. Filming began in April 1962, and it unraveled immediately. Fox had hired George Cukor to direct, a respected name on paper, but a disastrous fit in reality. He was inflexible, sharp, and openly contemptuous of method acting. He despised Marilyn's acting coach, Paula Strasberg, who stayed close to her at all times. His impatience filled the set. He mocked Delise. He sighed loudly when Marilyn asked for another take. Every moment reinforced the feeling that she was a burden, and Marilyn was already breaking. Early in the shoot, she fell seriously ill. A high fever, chronic sinus infections, her voice nearly gone. Doctors ordered a complete rest. The studio didn't care. They assumed she was exaggerating, being difficult. Each missed day cost money. Fox no longer had, thanks to Cleopatra. Quietly, they began to poison the well. Stories leaked to gossip columns. Marilyn was drunk. Marilyn was on pills. Marilyn was unstable. It was a calculated teardown, designed to shift blame away from executive failure. Then came the moment that sealed her fate. In May 1962, while officially too sick to film, Marilyn flew to New York to sing Happy Birthday to President Kennedy at Madison Square Garden. The footage became iconic. The dread, the glow, the applause. For Marilyn, it was a rare moment of validation. For Fox, it was an unforgivable insult. She was supposedly bedridden, yet well enough to perform for the most powerful man in the world. When she returned to the set, the mood had turned openly hostile. Trust was gone. The knives were out. She managed to complete a handful of scenes, including the now famous swimming pool sequence where she looked radiant and alive. But behind the smiles, the decision had already been made. The studio was preparing to finish her. On June 8, 1962, Marilyn called in sick once more. That was the breaking point. Inside Fox, tempers exploded. Executives slammed their hands on polished desks and made a decision meant to send a message. They fired her. Not quietly, not privately. It was an execution carried out in public view. Fox released a statement crafted to end her career for good. They didn't mention creative disagreements. They accused her of willfully violating her contract. They announced a lawsuit demanding $750,000, a sum so massive it was designed to crush her financially. Worse than the money were the words. Studio executives fed reporters carefully chosen lines, painting Marilyn as a drug-addicted, unstable liability no one could work with. The goal wasn't just punishment. It was easy. They wanted to make her untouchable. Marilyn collapsed. She shut herself inside her Brentwood home, drew the curtains tight, and stopped eating. The industry she had sacrificed everything for had discarded her like trash. She was convinced her life was over. She told friends that everyone hated her, that there was no way back. At Fox, the mood was celebratory. Executives congratulated themselves. They believed they had reasserted control. No star, they told each other, was bigger than the studio. Now, all that remained was to replace her and finish the film. They cast Lee Remick immediately. She was young, talented, reliable, everything Fox wanted. Costumes were altered. Schedules were rewritten. Cameras were set to roll the following Monday. They never once thought to consult Dean Martin. Why would they? He was the male lead, a professional. Surely he would be relieved to work with someone easier. They were wrong. Dean was at home when his agent called. "It's done," the agent said. "They fired Marilyn. They're suing her. It's everywhere." Dean stayed quiet for a long moment, smoke curling from his cigarette. "Who's replacing her?" he asked. "Lee Remick. She starts Monday." Dean respected Lee. He'd worked with her before. She was good. She was good people, but this had nothing to do with her. This was about cruelty. Dean knew Marilyn hadn't been pretending. He'd watched her fight through fever and exhaustion on set, trying to hold lines together while barely standing. He knew Fox was scapegoating her to hide their own disaster with Cleopatra. He hung up the phone, walked to his closet, and put on his best suit. "No, entourage. No, yeah." He drove straight to the studio. He walked through the Fox gates, the same gates Marilyn had just been barred from, and headed to the office of the head of production. Inside, the room buzzed with nervous energy. Lawyers whispered. Assistants shuffled papers. Everyone was spinning damage control. When Dean entered, smiles appeared. They assumed he was there to discuss schedules. "Dean," the executive said, reaching out a hand. "Crazy week, huh? But it's handled. Lee Remick's a pro. We'll finish fast." Dean didn't take the hand. He didn't sit. He stood there calmly, looking at the men who thought they controlled everything. "I signed a contract," Dean said quietly. The executive nodded quickly. "Of course." And Marilyn broke hers. "We had no choice. It's business." Dean didn't react. "My contract," he continued evenly, "includes co-star approval." The room froze. Lawyers exchanged glances. They had counted on that clause being ignored. "I approve, Marilyn Monroe." Someone tried to interrupt. "Dean, she's unstable. She's sick." "We can't." Dean cut him off without raising his voice. "Then there is no movie." "I have nothing but respect for Miss Remick," Dean said evenly. "She's a fine actress. But I agreed to make this film with Marilyn Monroe." He fixed his eyes on the head of production. "I'll do the picture with Marilyn, or I won't do it at all." Then he delivered the line that stopped the room cold. "No, Marilyn, no movie." And with that, he turned around and walked out. What followed was chaos. Fox tried intimidation first. Legal threats arrived by mail. They announced plans to sue Dean Martin for millions, accusing him of being difficult and ungrateful. They fed the press stories painting him as unprofessional. Then they tried another angle. They floated the idea of replacing him too, recasting the entire film with new faces opposite Lee Remick. But when the accountants ran the numbers, reality hit hard. The film had already been sold worldwide based on 2 names. Without Marilyn, its value collapsed. Without both Marilyn and Dean, it was worthless. Just another script with no heat. Production halted. The lights went dark. The crew was sent home. Dean Martin, without raising his voice or waving a banner, had shut down a major studio. He didn't give speeches. He didn't argue in public. He went golfing. Reporters chased him across fairways, shoving microphones in his face. Was he really walking away from a fortune? Why defend Marilyn? Dean would smile, tip his hat, and repeat the same sentence. I signed a contract. I work with Marilyn. That was it. Calm. Final. By refusing to fight, he exposed how little power the studio actually had over him. Weeks passed. Fox continued to bleed money. Cleopatra was still a financial nightmare. They couldn't afford to lose another project. Finally, they cracked. Executives swallowed their pride and did what they swore they never would. They went back to Marilyn Monroe. Her lawyers received the call. The lawsuit would be dropped. She would be rehired. Her salary would be raised significantly. The director she clashed with would be replaced by someone she trusted. It was a complete reversal, an admission of defeat, and it happened for one reason only. When Marilyn heard the news, she cried not from triumph, but relief. She wasn't insane. She wasn't finished. Someone still believed in her. She spoke openly again, glowing in interviews, talking about what came next. To a close friend, she said simply, Dean did this. He stood up for me when no one else would. Think about that. In an industry full of people who wanted something from her, he wanted nothing. No leverage, no reward, just fairness. It was a brief moment of light. Marilyn prepared to return. Sets were cleaned. Scripts were revised. For a moment, it felt like the storm had passed. But some damage runs too deep. The months of humiliation, stress, and isolation had taken a toll. Even loyalty couldn't undo. Filming was set to resume in the fall. Dean was ready. Marilyn was preparing. Then, early in August, the phone rang at Dean's home. Marilyn was gone. An overdose, alone in her bedroom. Dean Martin was shattered. The man known for laughter and detachment went silent. He didn't perform for cameras. He didn't issue grand statements. He mourned. Privately, the film was abandoned forever, becoming one of Hollywood's most famous unfinished projects. Years later, when the surviving footage was finally assembled, it was painful to watch. Marilyn looked radiant, sharp, alive. Her chemistry with Dean was unmistakable. She relaxed around him, trusted him. It felt like watching a life paused just before it vanished. Dean never framed himself as a savior. When asked why he risked everything for her, he shrugged. She was my friend, he said. What else was I supposed to do? For Hollywood, it was unthinkable. For Dean Martin, it was the only choice. And that's the line between fame and legacy.